Well, I want to thank you all for coming to the Baker Institute this evening. I want to welcome President Liebran. We have our provost, Jean Levy. We have the Consul General of Israel, Asher Arden. Pleasure to have you here. Today, we have one of our most esteemed Baker Institute Fellows, Dr. Yair Hirschfeld, giving our presentation this evening. Yair has been with us for several years now. He has done yeoman work with the Baker Institute on some of our most important research programs in our conflict resolution forum of the Baker Institute. He has truly been my right arm in the various programs and meetings that we've had, many of them in the Middle East, on Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Syrian, and other broader issues in the Middle East. You can see in your program notes who he is, and I'm not going to repeat the information there. He is the Isaac and Mildred Brockstein Fellow in Middle East Peace and Security in honor of Yitzhak Rabin at the Baker Institute. His claim to fame, of course, one of his many claims to fame, is the truly historic role he played in Arab-Israeli peacemaking. He is an academic who truly made a difference. And if any person fills the logo, which is on our building, a bridge between the world of action and the world of ideas, it's Yair Hirschfeld. He was an academic, a man with a lot of ideas, and who became a very important instrument in Arab-Israeli peacemaking. He is a key architect of the Oslo Accords in 1993. He's been a consistent and very strong supporter of the two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. And there's an intriguing account that I had Yair read to make sure it was accurate. Benny Morris, who's an Israeli historian, says that Hanan Ashrawi, who spoke here a month ago, and Yair Hirschfeld, she was representing the PLO, the Palestinians, and Hirschfeld began maintaining back channels to the PLO's Faisal Husseini in 1989. And Faisal Husseini came from one of the most prominent families in Jerusalem. And Yair sought out a PLO finance minister by the name of Abu Allah, Ahmad Kari, who later became prime minister of the Palestinian Authority. And through the Norwegians, including the Norwegian Deputy Foreign Minister Jan Egeland and Rod Larsen of the Norwegian Institute of Applied Social Sciences, Yair had his first meeting with Abu Allah in London in December of 1992. Next year, in January, the Israeli Knesset repealed the law forbidding Israeli PLO contacts. The very next day, Yair met Abu Allah for the second time outside Oslo, and with the approval of Shimon Peres's deputy, the three met in secret 4 more times. And after that final meeting in May, the agreement was passed to official channels to become the Declaration of Principles between the Israelis and the Palestinians. At that time, it contained clauses for Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, gradual devolution of economic power to the Palestinians, and international economic assistance to the nascent Palestinian entity in Gaza. And it included the Gaza First principle. In other words, it was a modulated approach toward creating a Palestinian state that could live next to Israel in peace and security, but in steps, the so-called Gaza First principle. While he was doing all of these machinations, I was in Washington and as the head of Middle East Affairs, Near Eastern Affairs, and I was being briefed by my trusty deputy, Dan Kurtzer, on these contacts that were taking place, these academic contacts, I was told, that were taking place between the Israelis and the Palestinians through the good offices of the Norwegian Foreign Ministry. Yair and I have a difference on this. His interpretation is somewhat different, mine is somewhat different, but Dan Kurtzer kept me informed. But when those contacts became non-academic, and then Shimon Peres went and met with the PLO, the whole situation was transformed overnight. And Shimon Peres traveled to California to meet with the then Secretary of State Warren Christopher to inform them that not only were the Israelis in contact with the PLO, you got to remember at this time the PLO was a terrorist organization, and we did not meet with the PLO as a terrorist organization. But Shimon Peres came and informed Secretary of State Warren Christopher that these contacts were taking place, and actually that they had concluded in agreements that became the Oslo Accords, and the rest of it is history. The famous signing of the agreements on the South Lawn of the White House with President Clinton, Prime Minister Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Yasser Arafat. So there's a lot of history that this man had played a very important role in. So join me in welcoming Yair Hirschfeld to the Baker Street stage.
Dear Ambassador, President David Lebron of the Rice University, Consul General Asher Yarden, the Brockstein family, Raymond and Susan and the son, most distinguished audience. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to speak to you this evening. And I'll try to give you more or less an overview what is happening and where we could go and what the difficulties are. In speaking today, I must say that the vision for an Israeli-Arab comprehensive peace was started and moved substantially ahead in October 1991 in a place called Madrid, which Secretary of State Baker and Ambassador Jirijan prepared and developed and made possible. And the image and the vision of of an Israeli-Arab, comprehensive Israeli-Arab peace between Israel and all 22 Arab states, actually started to become the beginning of a possible reality in 1991. And this vision can be translated and has been translated and shall be translated into political drive and strategy. And actually, Madrid only made Oslo possible. Without Madrid, it would never have happened. I must say that the vision of the people I work with is a two-state solution. From my personal point of view, out of a very egoistic Jewish patriotic view, then only a two-state solution, making it possible for Israel and the state of Palestine to live in good neighborly relations side by side, can make it possible for the Jewish people to live in their homeland in agreed and recognized boundaries, and fulfill, implement the right of self-determination of the Jewish people, or let Israel be the nation state of the Jewish people, whereas the Palestinians will be the Palestine will be the nation state of the Palestinian people. Any other solution would put 5 million, slightly over 5 million Palestinians and 6 million Jews into one area, and would make a distinct identity of the Jewish people in one state and of the Palestinian state people in the other state not possible, whereas the Jewish state obviously will respect, in accordance with our Declaration of Independence, the full civilian rights of our Arab minority. Now, having these two important visions, the negotiating process started in 1991, and you will all agree with me that it went some through good times and some bad times, and there were good experiences and there were many failures. And speaking about the failures and speaking about the successes, I believe we have to concentrate and look quickly at what I would call 4 narratives. And I will tell you that the first 3 narratives may be quite in line with Ambassador Jirijan's book, be put under the title of dangers, and the 4th narrative I would put under the title of opportunity, and I'll try to lay this out to you in the coming 35 minutes, or maybe less. The first narrative is a narrative of despair, and you will hear it everywhere, and I actually heard it at this university only several hours ago. There is no two-state solution. Everybody hates everybody hates us Israelis. There's no way out. Nothing can be done. Everything has to somehow stay the same. From my sense of view, and I'll go more into that, I believe this is a very, very dangerous position, and I would, if I'm polemic, which I don't like to be, I would say it is a defeatist position. It is more than that dangerous because it tends to create self-fulfilling prophecy. Because obviously, if you don't change the course of events, if you believe that nothing can be changed, you will not make the necessary effort to move ahead. The second narrative, in many ways, is to all of us, I believe, more threatening. Well, the first one is bad enough. The second one is by large a Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian narrative, which is based largely on the assumption that I would say could be put under the title "God is on our side." You have radical Palestinians who believe that they can win in a conflict with Israel, that they can, over a process of time, they say they have much time, can destroy the state of Israel. I must tell you that this is true for Islamic radical fundamentalists. This is partly true for some of the pseudo-moderates. I had one pseudo-moderate who's a member of Fatah movement and in a relatively high position tell me one evening, saying when he had probably was had too loose a tongue, he told me, you know, we Palestinians will move you Israelis to more and more negotiations. Whenever you go forward and agree agree to our demands, we will make more demands, and thereby we will split the internal Israeli public, and we will make you weak and weaker, but we actually will not go for an agreement. This is not a very good perspective, and it is obviously a danger that we have to take account of. The second part of the same narrative is worse. The second part of the same narrative is actually saying, you know, we have what they call mukawama. Mukawama means the right of resistance. The right of resistance means that out of an old concept of guerrilla strategy, you turn a civil situation into a military situation. You provoke the other side by one military act after the other until there is a move back. If you move back, the Israeli side moves into civilian areas. You move into civilian areas, the suffering of the Palestinians, the support from the outside creates a lot of support, and actually you move the Israeli side more and more into Palestinian or Arab territory, and thereby extend the possibility for Israel actually to stand up to its real goals. That's the second narrative, and there is some strategic possibility to lead this, and we obviously will have to find answers to that. The third narrative is an Israeli narrative, which is also close to the concept is that God is on our side. The third narrative says we are stronger than the Palestinians. We are better organized. We have better politics. We can stand and fight it through all the way. And we will fight it through. We will not give in. We will not make any concessions. We will not negotiate. Or if we will negotiate, it will be only a kind of negotiation similar in a mirror movement to the other side, not to reach an agreement, but only to make a better impression. We will stand our way all the way long. It is a very dangerous narrative because it assumes that the Palestinian people and the Arab people and the Muslim world is monolithic, all in hostility against Israel. And it does not understand that resistance or mukawama in its essence is a threat more against Egypt, more against Jordan, more against Saudi Arabia than against Israel itself. It may be new to you to hear that by Al-Qaeda terrorism and other Islamic militant radical terrorism, more people have died in Jordan, in Egypt, and in Saudi Arabia than anyhow close to in Israel. And there is an interest, a basic interest in the Arab world to oppose these kind of very dangerous power politics, which clearly are aimed to undermine the stability of pro-Western, pro-American Arab regimes like Egypt, Jordan, and in a way Saudi Arabia too. So this is the third narrative, which I believe is very, very dangerous. And the fourth narrative falls under the Eurasian category of opportunity. We can say that we can learn from the mistakes and develop a strategy that can work. We can learn the lessons, and we can actually break the monolithic nature that doesn't exist in the Arab world, but build allies on the local level with Palestinians, on the regional level with various Arab regimes, with Muslim regimes, for instance, like Turkey, and we can build an ally, we can build a coalition definitely on the international level, definitely with the United States, but also with other powers. It is far more complex approach. It is more dialectic, and it is not easy to explain and to drive it. It's not easy at all to implement, but it is the only narrative that actually can move us ahead towards a future that will not be worse as the present and the past. So if I look at these, obviously I would sum up this point of my presentation that I would say the first narrative of business as usual. We know that in the Middle East there is either movement towards peace or movement towards radicalization. Business as usual will mean sooner or later, and I'm afraid sooner rather than later, to a new military conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, maybe in Gaza, and God forbid in other places too. So the issue of business as usual is actually a recipe for violence. The second narrative gets us into fearing negotiations. And anyone who hasn't been in negotiations tends to fear negotiations. But in negotiations, you understand that you can develop common ground and you can use the negotiations in order to build alliances and build basic understandings. And on the second narrative, it will mean that we'll have to look into activities, how to prevent spoilers from acting. How do we prevent this mukawama, going resistance, provoking Israel all the way, sending 7,000 rockets into southern Israel, terrorizing our southern population? How do we do this? We'll have to take care of that. And on the third narrative, I must say the Israeli population at large may, in its majority, tend to the third narrative. So we will show we have a very stiff neck. We are people with a stiff neck, and we tend to stand our place. But it is necessary to lead a more sophisticated policy, and I very much hope that the incoming Israeli government will do this. The first signs are vaguely positive. So let me speak about the fourth narrative. Actually, my real presentation is to give you a narrative of the fourth narrative and see what we can learn of what has happened. And because I don't want to spend with you the next 15 hours, I will jump from 1991 to 2007. And will not go through the entire process. I'm happy if the University of Rice University invites me to give a seminar on this for a long time, but this is not for 10 or 15 minutes. But the fourth narrative will start in many ways, starts in Annapolis in November 2007. And the Annapolis process had in its essence 4 different components, or 4 different strategy points that were all pursued in a more or less consequent way. The first component, and I'll go more into it, has been Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations, by the obligation to negotiate until there will be peace, which was led on 3 levels. The level of Prime Minister Olmert with President Abu Mazen, the level of great teams led by our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tzipi Livni, and by Abu Allah, whom I met in London and in Oslo. And the 3rd level, there were planning teams who did also quite a lot of work. And the negotiations, I'll come into it in a minute, what was achieved and what wasn't achieved. But by and large, it meant to see how do we reach a top-down, we call this top-down, how do we reach an understanding between the leadership that then can be put into an agreement and then can be implemented and change the reality on the ground. It was complemented, it was added by a mission that Condoleezza Rice created. She asked General James Jones, who's today the National Security Advisor, to lead a mission that would look into mainly have a dialogue with Israeli security forces and see what would be necessary from a security point of view to make a two-state solution possible. And I'll give you more on this because it's quite relevant of what is happening today. The second component that was started or strongly reinforced in Annapolis was what we call the bottom-up approach. There was an obligation for roadmap implementation by both parties, and there were 2 mechanisms created on the ground, which were American mechanisms, to actually do bottom-up. Bottom-up meant that let's create change on the ground, build a 2-state solution on the ground, and create the necessary capacities of a Palestinian Authority to actually assert its duties as a government in the West Bank. Gaza is a different story. And in order to do so, the American government appointed General Keith Dayton, with whom we worked very closely together, by the way, also with General Jones, and who developed Palestinian security capacities, a professional Palestinian security force, and the Palestinian-Israeli security coordination. And General Paul Selva, whose task is to follow up what we call roadmap implementation and would oversee more or less the activities of both sides on the bottom-up issues. There was a 3rd component, and the 3rd component was done largely partly in silent acceptance, half opposition to the American administration. The Israeli government started in Ankara proximity talks with the Syrians. And they opened up the possibility of an Israeli-Syrian peace, or made it very clear what has to be done in order to move there, in order as part of a wider regional understanding. And the 4th part was started by the United States, that the United States started to send Ambassador Burns to participate in multilateral negotiations with Iran as part of also a regional approach that went. Now let me look with you on all these 4 issues into what was the experience gained, what were the lessons learned, what are the challenges that have to be faced, and how does this impact upon the 5-component strategy that we're actually proposing. The Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations made quite a lot of headway, and the gap was narrowed, by no means closed. On territory, the Palestinian position submitted was that they accept swaps, territorial swap. They wanted a territorial swap on what we call a 1-to-1 basis, 1 acre for 1 acre. And they suggested that the swap should not be more than 1.9%. The Israeli suggestion was of Foreign Minister Livni that the swap should be 7.5%, and it is a huge difference. I don't want to go too much into it, but the difference is the numbers of settlers you have to remove, the strategic point. It's quite a big one. Prime Minister Olmert suggested to President Abbas to go for 6.3% 1-to-1 territorial swap. So the Israeli side went a little bit down from the 7.5%. Still, the gap was still quite removable. We in the Baker Institute are working on the territorial issue, and I believe that we have quite an in-depth professional understanding of it that can be useful in further negotiations. On the Jerusalem issue, Abu Mazen did something very interesting, very unlike Arafat, by the way. He asked in the negotiations to permit Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Morocco to play a role in Jerusalem. If I translate this into my language, he was actually saying, I alone cannot sign a deal on Jerusalem. I need the Arab states to support me. And Prime Minister Olmert made a very daring proposal that, and they actually agreed on something very important. They agreed that the Israeli areas in Jerusalem beyond the 4th of June line the neighborhoods will be part of Israel, and the Palestinian neighborhoods beyond the 4th of June line, but within the municipality borders, will be neighborhoods of Al-Quds, of the Palestinian capital and the state of Palestine. And they agreed also that on the Temple Mountain, or on the Haram al-Sharif, there would be an international body that only could act by consensus of the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Palestine, which is quite a proposal from the Israeli point of view. But it meant that if you want to go on Jerusalem, the lesson you learn is that you have to have some regional component on it. On refugees, there was even more relative agreement. Also, I must say, also here, Abu Mazen said, I cannot do it alone. I need the Arab Peace Initiative to support it. Beyond this, there was very little agreement on security. There was agreement on settlements, that settlements outside the settlement blocks that will be incorporated into Israel in a territorial swap will have to be evacuated, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 20 years. They spoke about one generation, but there has been some kind of understanding what this would mean. The General Jones development was that he started off discussing Israeli security from Israel to the West Bank and beyond, from Israel to Gaza Strip and beyond. And what came out of the dialogue was an understanding that if you want to speak about Israeli security, there are threats in the West Bank and in Gaza, and there are the rockets and all of this. But we have to take care of the threats that may come from Pakistan, that might come from Indonesia, that definitely come from Iran, that may come from terror acts in Nigeria. We need to take care of security threats against Israel that can come from very radical Islamic groups that have non-conventional weapons and carry out all kinds of attacks against Israel, that we have to have a discussion with the United States and deal with it. Instead, what we called an inside-outside approach, we developed an outside-inside approach. Actually, this all happened from July. We were partly linked to part of the thinking. So it happened from July 2008 to the 3rd of November 2008. You may remember what happened on November the 4th. And I'm very happy that General Jones got this very important position, but I'm not happy at all. And I told him, actually, that the work he started has to be continued. You can't stop speaking about the security components and stop in the middle without coming to clear conclusions. So the lessons we learned from this is that bilateral negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians are necessary. They're an important component, but this is not good enough. The second lesson we learned, there is the need for a very important US role. And there's the need for a very, very important regional role in it. I think these are three lessons that are decisive in defining the strategy we're working on. The first challenge is to define an Israeli-US understanding on a regional security concept that can take care of Israel's security for the decades to come. And I understand that in the US nation as a whole, and definitely this administration, is committed to Israel's security, and therefore this is an engagement that hopefully will start after May the 18th, when our Prime Minister will be in Washington. There is a challenge to define the regional component, and it's not an easy one, and I'll go a little bit more into it. the part of the regional component is that you will have the challenges that you have to coordinate the interests of Turkey, Syria, Jordan, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and Egypt. And that's more difficult than it sounds, but I believe it is a challenge we can engage in. On the bottom-up activities that started in Annapolis are the real success story that we have to tell you of during the last year. The bottom-up, we succeeded in developing what we call Jenin first, Hebron second, and Nablus third. There was a strong Palestinian security force that has been established. It has been deployed in huge areas of the West Bank. It has been successful beyond expectation. The IDF, as a matter of fact, opposed it in the beginning, and afterwards, and now is very, very supportive with it. It has had in the last year basically 3 components, and it needs more. It had developed more and more Palestinian security forces on a professional basis, support economic development in these areas, and ease access and movement for the movement of Palestinians back and forth, trade, services and goods. What is the challenge that is happening now is that General Dayton has the task to develop not only the Palestinian security forces, but work together what we call the Arab Quartet. He's been to Abu Dhabi 10 days ago, and the Arab Quartet is Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Abu Dhabi. And it means that you need support from the outside, and there's quite a lot of goodwill from all these sides in the beginning of talks on these matters. The second challenge is to find out what it means, what Fayyad, the Palestinian Prime Minister, means, go back to the lines of the 28th of September 2000. Go back to the lines of the 28th of September 2000. I don't want to get into details, but we are working on this. We will be able to tell Prime Minister Fayyad you can get more and a little bit less. Exactly what was 28th of September. You can't pull the watch back, but you can go very close to it, and on some issues, some areas, you can have more control than you had before September 2000, and some you'll need a little bit less. The next challenge will be to turn the economic support activities, so mainly in 300 Palestinian villages, to turn that in building the infrastructure of the economic infrastructure of the Palestinian state. And there is much to be done: electricity, water, roads, many things more. And what will be needed too is a settlement containment, to stop settlement expansion, to try and bring illegal outposts in, to deal with the illegal parts of the Israeli law of illegal activities, the Israeli understanding of it, and to deal with it. This is, I believe, with the exception of the last one, which I don't know exactly what the Israeli Prime Minister's position is, our Prime Minister has actually said that he would go along on almost all of this. I believe this is an important challenge. The lessons are you cannot stay where you are. You have to expand these bottom-up activities. The challenge is that you have to prevent spoiler activity from disturbing it. And it means that you have to take care of the situation in Gaza. You have to find some kind of modus vivendi, as hard as it may be, with the situation in Gaza, and can make it possible to move towards not only humanitarian assistance in Gaza, but also a limited but clear reconstruction in Gaza, in a coordination where Prime Minister Fayyad can take the credit, but where the Hamas can also get some kind, will not be totally threatened in its position. We are speaking a lot to the people in the Congress, people in the House on it. It is in concept, it is an American idea too. It needs a lot of understanding what can be done and what not. It is a very difficult and touchy thing, but these lessons have an immediate impact on what I would say the first and second component of our 5-component strategy. The Israeli-Syrian proximity talks in Ankara. Proximity means that you don't speak to each other, but there's someone in between. It means that you speak to the Turks and they speak to the Turks. But they've been relatively surprising. They've been kept very quiet. But if you get a readout, and they've been quite importantly successful. There's been an important headway in these talks, and there's no question that there's a big opportunity in moving down the road. But I will tell you that in order to move down the road, there are 4 challenges which are very, very, very serious and not easy to deal with. The first is we need to deal with Hezbollah and Hamas. The Syrian position is, let's sign a treaty of peace, and afterwards we'll decrease our support for Hezbollah and Hamas. I can tell you in a very, very, very reliable manner that of course it is an Israeli interest to prevent Hamas and Hezbollah from doing all their terror acts before we sign the treaty, because they can't have the legitimacy. No prime minister will have the legitimacy to sign a peace before. But I can add to it that this is not only an Israeli interest, but this is clearly an Egyptian, Jordanian, and PA interest. We've been told expressis verbis in no uncertain terms by our Egyptian counterparts that if Syria goes along and maintains its relationship with Hezbollah and Hamas and signs a treaty of peace, this is the end of the Palestinian Authority. And this may carry heavily on the position of Jordan and Egypt versus Iran, Syria, and the radical camp. So it is not only an Israeli position, but it is actually a joint Israeli, Egyptian, Jordanian PA position. And I can tell you that there's little things we can influence on the intellectual level. On the intellectual level, we will try to mobilize this message to the American administration, that the American administration will fully understand that this is not merely an Israeli interest, but this is an interest of all of actually all of the moderate camp in the Middle East. There is a difficulty in that, and the challenge is there that the Syrians say you cannot ask from us up front to make all the concessions you need, so we cannot make up front go and sever our relations to Hamas and Hezbollah. Also, they value the relations with Hezbollah more than with Hamas. But we can benchmark it. I remember that in December 95, after the murder of Rabin, in January 96, Prime Minister Peres led negotiations with Syria. We had terrible terror attacks in February and March in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. And Hafez al-Assad was not prepared to say this is a bad idea. And he says, you know, I'm not going to go, forgive me, to go into a serious romance with Israel before we're getting married, before we have a treaty. But I could tell the Syrians, you know, you don't have to behave like a 13-year-old who hits the lady you might be interested in as a sign of sympathy. You can make some confidence-building measures. We will also make some, but there's some understanding that you can move on that. So you will have the first challenge is how do you deal with it, and this is linked in many ways to the second challenge of benchmarking these negotiations in an important way. I would argue, and it may be not easy for the American side to listen, that Syria is more interested in improving relations with the United States than in getting the Golan back, and part of it will see how does the United States come in these negotiations and prepare the way to a headway. The third challenge with the Syrians is how do you integrate these Israeli-Syrian negotiations in the wider Israeli-Arab track? How do you integrate it with the Palestinians? The Jordanians are telling us if you move on the Syrian side and you have to get settlers, about 17,000 settlers out of the Golan Heights, then there will be settlement activity in the West Bank. It will put major pressure from the West Bank on Jordan. It will be a disaster for Jordan. So how do you integrate this in a wider Arab, Israeli-Arab concept? We'll have to think about it, and we'll have to come up with answers about that. The next one is something I talked about before, is how do you streamline the interests of Turkey, Syria, PA, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Israel in a way that we can work somehow together. I was in Turkey last Friday week, 10 days ago, and there I spoke to the Minister of European Affairs, a friend of mine, Egeman Bagis, and he comes from the ruling AKP party, and there's a lot of goodwill to work with Israel together. There are a lot of difficulties, so this is also one of the challenges we have to deal with. Now let me shortly go into Iran, and I'll be short on Iran, because I believe it is a very important factor. But if we have an Israeli-American security concept, and if we have an understanding of how to move ahead on the other issues, I believe that there is an interconnection. We have to be afraid of the interconnection. But we have to actually be clear how to deal with this Iranian thing. And I'll tell you, there are 4 threats to Israel. The first threat is obviously nuclear. And there are 3 stages that we're in. That is the enrichment of uranium, which we think has to be stopped. Then it is getting to the breakout where they prepare a bomb but don't show that they have it. And then it's beyond the breakout when they have a bomb. And obviously the vital, essential Israeli interest is to stop the Iranians at the first phase. And it is an Egyptian interest, and it is a Turkish interest that is far wide in the Middle East too. The second threat is what we call mukawama. They use terror against us in order to suppress and put pressure on the Arab moderate governments. And we have a common interest with the Arab governments to find a coordination with it. General Dayton's activity with the Arab Quartet, looking into how you deal with this, is an important manner to actually leave the Iranians aside and say on this mukawama thing, they should not interfere in a most despicable, immoral act of abusing the suffering of other people for their very, very cynical own advantage. The third danger is the danger of rockets. The danger would have been 7,000 rockets from Gaza in the last 1.5 years on our population. In the war with Lebanon, there have been rockets on my house. Fortunately, not directly on my house, but 100 meters away. There have been a lot of rockets on the north. That must be very, very clear that all the rockets delivery that they're doing and all this has to be stopped, and there has to be a clear discussion on this. And then you have they have those rockets going around in Tehran streets, and they say in Persian, Marge Iran. It is translated in the American press into down with Marge Israel. Quite a Freudian slip. The Marge Israel is translated in the American press with down with Israel, but the Persian real translation is death to Israel. So, you know, this kind of rhetoric is not very becoming. I think President Obama has taken a clever move to see what are legitimate Iranian demands, and I could take you there, and what are not illegitimate, what are illegitimate Iranian demands. And this discussion in itself will put them, and already put them in the defense. But they may want to eat the cake and have it. They will want to get the legitimate demands, but continue with the illegitimate demands, and it will need a lot of thinking how to deal with it. I think I would challenge a common concept that is held in some circles in the United States and with this administration, which says if there's an Israeli-Arab peace, this will end Iranian machinations against Israel. Basically, the real motivation for Iranian terror support is that they want to put the Arab countries states under pressure. And if there's a united US, Israeli, Arab bloc, this is a threat to Iran. And therefore, they will continue, also after we have peace, to try to make difficulties. And we have to be aware of it, and we have to take account of it. Now, how to deal with the Iranian thing is long and complicated, but there must be, there has to be a negotiation process. Part of it has to be independent of them. I believe you need to develop, the United States needs, independent of the Iranians, and not with the Iranians. They may listen to them and hear what they want, to have some idea what their basic needs are. But independent of the Iranians, the United States has to develop a security stability for the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. And as Ambassador Jarijan wrote in his book, to deal with the Pakistan and Indian issues and the entire instability in the area. I believe that I don't want to go into that, but some of the concepts that were developed in Southeast Asia, the Asian security concept, shows a process that can help the United States to do this, to develop such a concept with Russia, with China, with India, and with other littoral powers. And Iran is not a major actor on that, but Iran must be clear that it can be part of it and can play with it, or if it plays against it, then will have to be a very big coalition against it and a very strong position taken. The challenge in these issues is how do you coordinate a position that can be unified with this? And how do you look at the legitimate Iranian concerns? One will be on energy. On energy, I understand that very important work has been done here on energy between Iran, Russia, and I don't know, Afghanistan, and in the Caspian area. And there's the connection towards Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey. It all goes together. And there are very important, there are some very legitimate demands of the Iranians that you can look into that. But you have to know that there are no free lunches, and there are something. So if I boil down, I would say this puts me up to if you put the logic of all of this together, it gets you to a 5-component strategy. And the 5-component strategy is strengthen bottom up, create change on the ground towards a 2-state solution, beyond the point where we are now, go actually think of settlement, evacuation, relocation, think of how do you actually develop the steps that you need to get to a 2-state solution. The second component is you have to have a clear policy as how to deal with the spoilers in Gaza. General Spiegel and myself were at the United Nations 2 or 3 days ago, and the United Nations can play a very important role with the quartet led by Tony Blair. We have some ideas how to do it. I can relate to it in the discussion. But the de-escalation in Gaza, which obviously should start with the freeing Gilad Shalit, but we have to look at other possibilities too. But the de-escalation in Gaza is very important because it easily can spoil the entire move. The third phase is phasing the Arab Peace Initiative. Now, the Arab Peace Initiative itself is complicated and part of, but in essence, the British government has been in a very intense dialogue with the Egyptian government, with the Saudis, with the Jordanians, and they spoke about the first phase, which they've called freeze for unfreeze, or freeze for thaw, which is a better English word but more difficult for us to pronounce. It means freeze of settlements, containment of settlements, for defreeze of Israeli-Arab relations. And there are some ideas about it that have been discussed between the British government in place of the American government. They still believe in the Atlantic Alliance. And I believe some of these ideas are very practical and can be followed up. And I'm quite sure they will be followed up. I'm quite confident that our Prime Minister, when he comes here on May the 18th, will take this regional thing up and see how to handle it. So that's the third phase, the third part. The fourth is to coordinate the struggle against terror and Muqawama with all the nations that actually are afraid of Iran. In a way, Iran plays an interesting role that the Egyptians are afraid of Iran, the Jordanians are afraid of Iran, everybody actually on our side. And the need to undermine this cynical way of using terror against Israel, we're starting to find ways. With the beginning, we've started to move with Egypt in basic understandings. There's basic thinking. There's good data connectivity with the PA has been important. With Jordan, there are good relations. It has to be expanded, I believe, with Turkey, and has to have better understandings. But it is a very fourth important part of the strategy that we're thinking of. The fifth part, I have no doubt that the 4 first parts of this strategy will be fully discussed on May 18th between our Prime Minister and President Obama. The fifth part of the strategy, and I believe we'll need to think about it, and track 2 can think easy about it than track 1, is how do you lead and how to bring about US bridging proposals on on all of these issues in order to move ahead on an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, but simultaneously on an understanding how to coordinate it with Syria and on a wider Israeli-Arab comprehensive agreement. Now let me tell you, in order to finish, that the three first narratives show the enormous dangers that we deal with. And they may tell us that there may be a thunderstorm ahead of us. And the logic of developments, the inertia of developments, is all to the bad, not to the better. So I would be aware of the dangers of the first three narratives. The fourth narrative offers an opportunity ahead, however complicated it may be. Now, there is this wonderful slogan of President Obama, actually President-elect Obama and then President Obama, change, yes we can. I must say that I like the slogan and I'm fascinated by it, but I would be careful. I would be careful. I have a different slogan, which in essence is an Israeli slogan, and a tougher one, which says it's not going to be easy. But the slogan in Israel was in the early days of the state, Ein Barara. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. We have no other choice. This is the only choice we have, and that is what we're going to work for. Thank you.
Yair is ready to take some questions. I know that we don't have that much time, but certainly the floor is open. I've got to mention that Yair and his lovely wife live in a part of Israel, the northern part of Israel, called Megiddo, which some of you will know is the contemporary name for Armageddon. So this colors his thinking a bit. If you live that close to Armageddon, you have a very fatalistic attitude toward life. Floor is open to questions.
Question. When you speak about a bottom-up movement towards a two-state solution,
I don't hear you.
When you speak about the bottom-up movement towards a two-state solution, is this trying to make the idea more appetizing to the citizens, or is there, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that for 18 years we've negotiated, and change on the ground went from bad to worse. I'll put this to you in settlement numbers. We had, when Camp David was negotiated in 1978 by President Carter, there were 7,000 settlers in the West Bank. When Oslo was negotiated, there were 90,000 settlers in the West Bank. At the end of the 5 years of Oslo, which were in 2000, there were 200,000 settlers in the West Bank. Today, there are 280,000 settlers in the West Bank. And it means that, that it is more and more difficult, because it's more and more difficult to come to terms. How many can we take up? How many can we take them out? How do we take them out? We all know it is necessary. So the bottom up is an answer to it. You create more and more control of the Palestinian government on the territory. You create a functioning security source. You create a secure and stable environment that will make it possible for us to move out. You create the necessary understandings to move around. The bottom up is quite a big thing to do. And it's a challenge, which is not a small one. Nobody believed it would be possible. We were a little bit out in the desert, and General Dayton and actually General Jones gave the political support, and we helped in thinking of it. It showed that this is possible.
It's been, oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Knowing what you know today, what would you have done differently in 1991?
In 1991, nobody asked me. Also, I was active. I was at Madrid, and I was actually with the Palestinians in Madrid in 1991. I tell you what I said then, and that is, you're putting me. It's a long answer, but no, I'll give a short answer. What we said then in '93, we said let's have an agreement on Gaza first and self-rule, and immediately go to permanent status. And we worked on it. We established a dialogue with Arafat and with it, and we would have gone immediately to permanent status. To go to phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 of the Oslo thing, I believe, was a mistake. So this is, we said then. There are many other things I would have done different. What I would have done different most, and I didn't say, I said the opposite then, was have a referendum to make it clear that 75% of the Israeli public were in favor of Oslo, and the idea of murdering our prime minister is so outrageous that you'll be. So on this, these are the two major issues.
Okay, gentlemen, I promise.
It seems to me it's been an axiom of Middle East situation for many years that most of the Arab countries don't really care about the Palestinians, but they do care about having a Palestinian problem, which gives them something to rally their own people around. You talk now about helping the Arab countries helping in a peace process, and it sounds very encouraging. To what extent do you think that help right now is due to their fear of the Iranians as opposed to their interest in solving the Palestinian problem?
The short answer is they are telling us we have no interest in the Palestinian issues, but we need a Palestinian state. Jordan needs a Palestinian state for their identity, as we need a Palestinian state for our identity. The Egyptians and the Saudis need a Palestinian state in order to decrease the radicalization efforts that they can push on. So I think it is the combination of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda that makes them want it and go in this direction. But the answer to you is that it is out of fear more than out of love.
You're outlining the two-state solution and the reduction of settlements in the West Bank makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. However, do you think it's possible under the present Israeli government and the support that they have from the minority positions to make that happen?
If I would know. The answer is, I speak to Likud people, and I've got some of them very good relations, so I don't exactly belong to that camp. But they have less ideological connection to the settlements than it looks. And they would like, they came out, the present ambassador, the new Israeli ambassador to Washington said we have to get the settlements out. Now the truth is that Mr. Netanyahu, and with his present government, will have to be very careful how he handles it. I believe that in order for him to move down the line that I speak, he needs Tzipi Livni and Kadima. My sense is if he falls, she will need him. And what I can tell you is that people who have got a similar conception as we will try to challenge Mrs. Livni to say how can you actually support this kind of approach. So if he has Tzipi Livni in his government, and if she afterwards takes over, I think it can be done. It's easier said than done.
We seem to be having as much a chance of having a three-state solution as a two-state solution. What momentum is there within the Palestinian entity that is driving those two together? You've mentioned a lot of things tonight, but have left out the roads towards reconciliation between whatever's happening in Gaza with what's happening in the West Bank. Or could there be a three-state?
On the reconciliation issue, there's a zero-sum game between Hamas and Fatah, or PA. And it makes it very difficult for the reconciliation. A three-state solution is a clear threat to Egypt, and the Egyptians are telling us, you better forget about it. And if we want Egypt in the room, we want to coordinate with Egypt, we have to take care of their needs. I believe what is possible is what I speak about, a de-escalation in Gaza that recognizes certain facts on the ground that the Hamas will still maintain substantial control, but the PA will be responsible for reconstruction in a coordinating manner, and you can find the modus operandi on these issues. I think that's possible.
Yes, in June, there are two elections in the Middle East, one in Lebanon, where Hezbollah may do very well, the second one in Iran, where Ahmadinejad may have a little bit of a battle. on his hands, even though his power is limited. What role do you see these elections and the results playing in the overall Middle East peace process?
On Iran, if Ahmadinejad gets re-elected, if I'm not quoted, I will tell you it will be easier for Israel to convince everybody that there has to be very strong action against them. If somebody else will be elected, I don't think they will stop the nuclear build-up. That doesn't mean that I believe that I would like to have Ahmadinejad, don't misread me. I believe a more moderate leadership will not put away the nuclear threat to us, but will make a discussion on what are the legitimate Iranian interests and what are not legitimate Iranian interests more feasible. So I don't know in what direction it's going to go. I have tomorrow meetings in Washington where I'm going to listen, not to speak. That's on Lebanon. On Lebanon, I believe that the Hezbollah, if we move, the decisive issues, how we move with Syria, Turkey, and this, and if they are in government and we move ahead with the Syrians in an intelligent way, I believe that then the Hezbollah is in government is not necessarily a disaster, but I may be too optimistic on that.
It's a possibility. I want to mention that we have General Baruch Spiegel here, who's a part of our team, of our conflict resolution team, a very illustrious Israeli general who's helping us greatly in our conflict resolution. I want to just recognize General Spiegel. We're going to pay maybe one to two more questions, and that's it. Thank you.
As time has gone on, I've read reports that the Palestinians themselves are much less interested in a two-state solution than they were 5 years ago or something. What percentage of the Palestinian population would you say supports a two-state solution now?
No, I'll tell you a short story. I had I'm a teacher at Haifa University, and in the 80s I worked with a student leader who was a communist then on equality for Arab students at Haifa University. We did quite a good job, and we became friends. I haven't seen him for 15, 20 years. I see him 4 or 5 years ago, and he's become a member of not the communist, but the kind of the more fundamentalist group, not Islamic, but a secular radical group. And he tells me, Yair, we support Hamas because they don't want a Palestinian state. And if there's a Palestinian state, we can weaken Israel more than without a Palestinian state. There are Palestinians who think this way. And I believe that Hamas doesn't want a Palestinian state, or they want more and more power. It's not going to be easy. We have to convince them.
Are there any polls that indicate what the percentage is?
There are polls. I can show you polls. There are polls which were made just recently from the Irish Institute of Liverpool University, and they show on all the issues what the positions are. If there is a united position, is that all Palestinians want to end occupation. Now, a Palestinian state means for us ending occupation of the West. From my point of view, we ended occupation of Gaza and they made war against us, and we didn't control it. But if we make life for Palestinians miserable, if we like it or not. It is a fact, and for people who want to live. And we have to find a way to make life livable for the Palestinians, which means to move towards end of occupation of the West Bank on agreed borders, on agreed recognized borders. And it's a challenge. I think it's possible.
Okay, Gene, be the last question.
Yeah, there's a tendency, of course, to focus on the near-term pressing conflicts and resolving those. But imagine the two-state solution were implemented, and look several decades into the future. How do you envision the internal Israeli demography to develop and the implications of that?
I have a very good friend who is vice president of the World Bank and was Jordanian Minister for Foreign Affairs, Marwan Muasher. And he wrote a book, The Arab Center. And he was the first Jordanian ambassador to Israel. And he describes Israel in its modern and Western part, and it's very Oriental part. And I must say I had laughed a lot when I read it. But he says, you know, we Arabs believe that if there's peace with Israel, there will be Israeli cultural imperialism all over the Middle East. I can tell you, says Marwan Muasher, if there will be Israeli-Arab peace, there will be more and more Oriental culture in Israel and not the other way around. So on this we will become part of the Middle East. We will be a bridge between the Middle East and Europe and the West. On the demographic part, if you look at 1948, there were 156,000 Arabs there and 600,000 Israelis. And this were 20%. Today, there are 20% Arabs within the Green Line, and there are 80% Israeli Jews. So, you know, I like to live in good relations with our Arab minority. I believe that we have an obligation as Jews, also religiously, but also from every time, to develop equal citizenship. I can tend you a lot of my experiences on this. They've been all relative positive. The truth is that the wound is kept open, tends to radicalize them. If the wound is closed, it will make things easier, not more complicated.
Thank you very much, Dr.